Fresh I come from Sandgate Street. Dolly, Dolly, my best friend there to meet. Dolly, ah, Dolly the Dylan Don. Dolly, Dolly, Dolly the Dylan Don. Dolly, Don.
Hello, I'm going to talk quickly about a couple of books that I've written over the past few years after writing songs for many years. About 2016 I suddenly found that I'd written a longer thing, a novel which I wrote and I finished and I just left. I sat on it. It might even have been 2015 when I did it. So it sat there, and then eventually I started a second one. Then I thought, hang on a minute, I better do something with the first one before I go on to the second one. And the first one came out, actually published by Bad Apple Books in 2017. This is it, The Dylan Doll, and it's based on a song, as many people listening to this will know, a song called Dolly R, which is an old Geordie street song from probably around the turn of the sort of 1800, early 1800s anyway. Dolly the Dylan Doll, and it's a very short song. Nobody really knows who Dolly was or why there's a song about her, but the song has survived for many, many years till the present day. It's been recorded by all kinds of people. The first, one of the first recordings of it in modern times was Luke Killen back in the late 1950s did it. A lot of people were influenced by that. The tune as well is very strange. The tune is almost sort of Middle Eastern in tone, which kind of reflects the way Newcastle was at the time. We're talking about Newcastle just pre-industrial revolution, and so the Tyne is full of ships and keels. The keels were the barges. They took the coal from the coal mines. There were hundreds of coal mines, literally hundreds of coal mines, right up the Tyne Valley, down into Durham and Wearside, and they would take the coal down the river and then to be loaded onto bigger ships to be taken south to London or wherever. And this woman, Dolly Coxon was her name, that's what it says in the song, Dolly Coxon pawned her sark. And people think of her as some sort of like maybe a bit of a loose woman, Tyneside loose woman around the bars of the quayside and the pubs and taverns. And in fact, it was hearing somebody sing the song and speak quite sort of negatively about about Dolly Coxon was what really, I think, inspired me to start writing this story. I felt if somebody'd written a song about this woman and that song had survived for so long, then she must have been somebody special. She must have had a reason to be and to do what she did. And so I, in my sort of naivety, decided to give her a bit of dignity, a bit of a story. And that's what this song is all about, this book is all about. And Tyneside at the time is like many of the cities in England, certainly at the time, and a port with a big river. The thing about it was, I think Newcastle is probably until this day is seen as one of the most foreign of the English cities because it's so far away from the important south of England. And so the setting is kind of Newcastle, and it's pretty wild. Not actually that different from what it is now. A lot of the places, when I did the research, a lot of the streets, a lot of the pubs that existed at the time of Dolly Coxon exist still, and they're just as wild. If you're ever on the quayside on a Friday night, you'll know what I mean. So as I say, it's pre-industrial revolution. It's just before all that started, really. And the keelmen, who had the keels taking the barges down the Tyne full of coal, they were like a superior to everybody else. That's how they thought themselves. They dressed in a special way. There's the song, "We'll Make the Keel Row that my laddie's in." So the keelmen sort of ruled the river on a sort of a working class sort of level. The horsemen were the men who owned the businesses and did all the wheeling and dealing and made all the money, of course. And but there's a lot of immigration going on, a lot of people coming in, obviously with being the ships and stuff. And but the essential thing about it was, and that's what is really at the heart of this, is the music, the songs, and the characters in the songs, and the characters who historically existed and who I was able to find. They're well known to this day. And obviously Dolly Coxon in the song was a real person, I would imagine, because what happens in the song to her. And then there was all these other characters who I was able to feed into the story. And there's a big, very famous painting. Sometimes it's called the Newcastle Worthies, sometimes it's called Hell's Kitchen, and it was done by a man called Henry Parker, who I think was from Bristol, but he came up to Newcastle attracted by the music and the characters there. Presumably there's some link between the port of Bristol and the port of Newcastle, obviously. So anyway, this guy Henry Parker came up and he drew this very famous painting, which I don't think exists anymore, but copies and photographs and prints of it do. And all these people on this painting, it's just like this sort of very strange gathering of odd characters with names. There are names. There's Blind Willie, Willie Purvis, the fiddle player. There's a song about him as well. Captain Starkey, Ralphie the Hawk, Drunken Bella Roy. There's about maybe 20, 25 of these people. So I was able to pick out characters for this novel and weave them into the Dolly Coxon story. And then as a supplement to that, I made up some characters myself. So there's a hero. Dolly Coxon has a partner. She has a sweetheart. And then she also has somewhere where she works. This is all that I've sort of brought in, you know. I've invented this stuff. So I've invented this hero, this guy who she lived with, who what happens to him is really what feeds into what happens to her. And bizarrely, as I say, I just made up this character, and I thought what I'm going to have to do, because so much of what is said and what happens in the story in the novel is Newcastle, it's Geordie. So the accent, the words, the language, I tried to tone it down a bit because it had to be readable, it had to be understandable to people. But even so, there's a lot of sort of, sort of special language in there, as there is on Tyneside. So what I did with Dolly Coxon's partner, it's a device that I just thought up. He's not English, he's not Geordie, he's Italian. He's an Italian sailor or something, we're not quite sure what he is. So things that are very Geordie, the slang and the language, has to be explained to him as a foreigner. So in explaining to him, Dolly also explains to the reader sometimes. So that was a device I thought up, which I used again later on, actually, as I mentioned. And so he becomes a sort of a focal point for her and also for the reader, because he's absorbing things for the first time, whereas to Dolly Coxon it's a way of life. And but in finding this guy, I called him Moss, I had to have some sort of character, some sort of background to him as well. I thought I could have just made something up, but I didn't. I thought, well, if he's Italian, Italy didn't actually exist really to speak of at that time. It was lots of small countries and principalities that made up that part of that peninsula, which we now call Italy. So I thought I'd better do some research into that. And in doing that, I found that the character that I'd made up, this guy Muss, actually existed. He was the Italian equivalent of Dolly Coxon. He was this legendary figure, or certainly my concept of him fitted in to this legendary figure who was known as Balilla. And Balilla was an Italian hero. He was a young boy who, at the time of a war between states, between countries that had thrown that part of Italy, the northern part of Italy, into disarray, he became a hero. What he did, he saw his father being abused by invading soldiers. So he picked up a stone. This is the legend, the Italian legend. He picked up a stone, threw it, and in doing so, he started a counter-revolution. So he became a symbol of the people of that part of Genoa in northern Italy, fighting back against the invading armies. So nobody knows if he was real, nobody knows what happened to him, nobody knows if he existed. What I didn't know when I sort of embraced him and brought him into the story, sadly later on he was taken up as a symbol by the Italian fascists, Mussolini and the lads in the Second World War. I didn't know that at the time, but I mean, that's not his fault. That's neither here nor there as far as I'm concerned. So this guy, Moss, I call him, was in fact a real hero in Italian terms, known as Balilla. I'll read you a part of this this novel. This is chapter 1, and this is where how Dolly and Moss, Balilla, get together. Just to give you a flavour of what's going on, we find them in a bar. Dolly's working as a barmaid. She's washing the pots. Barmaid is probably too formal a term, and he's working as a river worker. So he's not a keelman. He's not a top class river worker. He's probably just a labourer on the water. And this is how they meet. He'd first spoken to her on a Thursday night at the end of last year's summer, in the rowdy snug of the Flying Horse, where she was fitfully employed dipping pots and trimming lamps. She'd seen him once or twice in the weeks before, usually towering over a quartet of loaders at the Sandgate side of the quay, as she'd made her way from this very room above the vinegar store towards the big market to start her daily work. The patch, of course, while not unique among the scavengers and haulers of this end of the city, had singled him out when coupled with the thick black hair and darkened features, not to mention a laugh that had shown more teeth than she'd seen on any man's mouth that she could remember. Had that attracted her, repelled her, or just puzzled her? She couldn't remember. Then she heard him talking in the snug as it emptied one night of a dogfight he'd witnessed in Montrose. His words were long, snapped, sometimes song-like, other times sharp and broken, a raw mixture of old Tyneside, Yiddish like Ezra the Lender, and Turkish like the shoe market vendors in the summer. He was French, she was told by a woman at the washer, a spy from the colonies, according to the muck-picker and pudding chair. It had been Harrison Marley, her own employer, whom she'd heard refer to him as Marasso, that Roman pirate, that night as she stoked the fading ashes of the year's first hearth, as the motley clientele indulged in their rowdiness around her. So that's how they meet. And not only is Dolly dipping pots, she's also the Dylan doll. The Dylan is an old English, probably maybe an old Northern English expression for a runt, the runt of the litter. She's deformed in some way. So she's got, I gave her a weak side. So she's got a weak arm and a weak leg, a bit of a limp. And that, the story, is what she kind of overcomes. I've wanted to make her blossom into something more. So as the story goes on and all the things that happen to her, she transforms herself by necessity, and the limp gets less, and the Dylan side of her character gets less, till the end of the story, when she's much more self-assured and much more the woman that I'd like to think she became. Just listening to that, reading it again, which I haven't read for 3 years, Pudding Chair is still a place that exists. The Flying Horse, I think, existed as a pub till relatively recently. Harrison Marley is a real character. His mother was Elsie Marley, and she owned pubs. She was a landlady of a pub, not in Newcastle actually, sort of a bit further west and south into Durham, across the south side of the Tyne. And Elsie Marley is famous because there's a song and a tune about her. And her son, Harrison Marley, took over the running of pubs that they had in the family after she'd deceased. So he becomes part of the story. And that's kind of what I did. I mean, I tried not to be too liberal. I try not to paint people different from how they are in history. But having said that, I have to say that using history as basis of fiction can be a perilous thing. You've got to be very careful, because I don't want people to read this and say, oh, that's how things were, this is what happened. It's not, it's all fiction. And I've actually rankled some of the people who seem to know more than I do about these things, I think they do, by their objection to the fact that historical novels actually usurp the facts and turn them into a story. But anyway, that's what I had to do, because there is no story for Dolly the Dylan Dog. And so the story goes on, and it follows the song. If the song is very short, so that it gave me kind of a lot of scope to be able to just embellish and to weave a real story based on what the song had to say. And so that was it. It goes on, it follows Dolly's rite of passage, if you like. There's another character, another hero, who's called Alec Parrish, who again is just fictionalised. It's not based on anybody, but then most of the other characters in the book are. So that was Dolly the Dylan Dog. And then, as I say, I was already working on a second novel before that one came out. And so I'm working one in hand all the way. So that was long finished before I started the second one. Before that was Dylan Dog was published, the second one was nearly complete. And this is the second one. This is The Corley Croons. This is set maybe 30 years later, a bit vague, but certainly middle of the 1800s. Again, Tyneside. Again, Industrial Revolution is now in full whack. It's going away there. The railways have arrived. New bridges are being built or planned to be built on the River Tyne. There's new factories on the south side of the Tyne in Gateshead. And so things have moved on a lot. What hasn't changed, but actually it has moved on, but what hasn't changed is the amount of music and song that was going on in Tyneside at the time. Again, this is something probably that was happening everywhere. What makes Tyneside different is, well, partly the language and partly the skill of the writers involved, but there was loads and loads of printers and song collectors, and these songs were actually being collected, cherished, printed, and so, copied into reality. So that's how they've survived to this present day. And by this time, there was this whole breed of writers known as the Bards of the Tyne. The songsters in the Dylan Doll are much more kind of organic. They're just street people who are making up things on a very basic level. By this time, there's been an influx of academics almost, who are writing songs in a poetic, sort of constructive sort of way. Many people find that not as strong as the older songs, but anyway, whatever it was, the bards of the Tyne are in existence here, and that's the crux of this. So although the story is like a whodunit, or as one of the my reviewers called it, a whodunit in Geordie terms, the whole basis is are the writers and the songs, the bards of the Tyne. And so what's going on here, I did a similar device as I'd done in the first one. I'm bringing in the Italian to the Geordie stuff can be explained to. In this one, it's a man from London who comes up to Tyneside on a quest of his own. Turns out he's a policeman, and he's on a special quest searching for somebody who happens to have the same name as one of the more mysterious bards of the Tyne. And so he goes up there. So in all the Geordie stuff has to be explained to him and then on to the reader. Some of the characters from the first novel are still around. One or two of them are still around for this second novel. But mainly it's a different time and a different approach. And I should maybe read you a bit at the beginning of this is how the book opens. The title of chapter 1, and went to Newcastle I gan. And I'll give you a taste of this. The town seemed to be tumbling down that day. Its stones and bricks and boards were being hacked and scratched and chewed at. Men, swarming like river rats, climbed across the jagged crust, biting at its edges and spitting out the stale mouthfuls in hideous heaps upon the scarred ground. Eaten away from the inside, its ribs and bones reached up painfully from the rubble, while merciless hands with picks and hammers beat its poor body to death in the cold early morning drizzle. They tugged and tore at it in a frenzy, ripping it apart, twisting it, torturing it in an orgy of dust and destruction. Nearby, a church steeple, spared from this only by the grace of God, looked down in sadness at the massacre, but made not a sound of sympathy. The deafening noise of demolition thundered on like the world's end, and the Lord chose to ignore it. Evan Piper, that's the hero, Evan Piper strained his neck upwards at the sight of two men on high, swinging long-handled hammers in rude rhythm at a single stubborn piece of wall that was still reaching up tall and proud at one end of the building that it used to be. As if in some mad airborne dance, the men wielded their weapons in pendulum swings and cracked at the brickwork like skillful spiders fighting over a web laden with yesterday's prizes. Piper felt himself catch his breath as he watched a chunk of it suddenly break free, taking with it a sizable piece of masonry as it hurtled down and causing both men to stagger back and fight for their balance, a full 30 feet or more from the ground. He heard the torrent of curses echo from this urban battlefield as fellow warriors down below called out words of abuse and ridicule in a language that meant nothing to him. The acrobats above him rested for a moment on their unsteady perch. By a low wall at the other end of this scene, a short but darkly handsome man suddenly raised his voice in song as he pulled whole bricks from a pile of debris at his feet. His voice was high and almost tender, in full command of the long swooping notes that the melody demanded. Remarkably, a paltry few of the words he sang reached Piper's ears intact. They spoke of pigtails, jackets and garters, and were seemingly in celebration of a man called Bob Cranky, a hero whose name was certainly unknown to him. Then at once, from all around this broken brick doomsday, other voices arose in chorus with the first, as if in some mad staging of a dawn-lit operetta, with a cast of performers whose face paint was grime and dirt, and whose costumes were mud-caked rags, torn coats, and sodden headwear. The song blossomed gloriously, but then was suddenly destroyed by ear-splitting strokes of picks and axes on stone from another corner of this curious theatre. Piper stood for a moment longer in thought, and then moved on. So that's Evan Piper, the hero of the Corley Croons. I can't tell you what the Corley Croons means. Again, it was just something I thought of, but that's the whole point of the story, where they're all trying to find out what this mysterious Corley Croons can be. And that once they find that, that opens up the plot to something which Evan Piper never dreamed about when he came up from Newcastle. But as I say, the important thing is the music, the songs are at the centre of the whole thing, that's what I'm about and that's what I'm interested in. But it's an era, I've written down here, it's an era of subversion and terrorism, anti-immigration, radicalism, nationalism. It's all going on. The parallels with today are just uncanny, but also dispiriting in many ways to see things haven't changed. So that's as much as I can tell you. That's the Corley Croons and the Dylan Doe, and I've already completed novel number 3, a follow-on, a direct follow-on from this one with many of the same characters in. Whether or not it'll ever get published the way things are going, I don't know. But the next one is already up and ready to go, and moving away from the song more to the music, to the Northumbrian music, out of Newcastle, out of the city, into the Northumbrian countryside for the next story. So hope that leaves you gasping for more. If you're interested in the books, have a look on my website, there's more information. Thanks very much.
Dolly Cox and Pandasa, Dolly, Dolly, to ride upon the baggage car. Dolly, ah, Dolly, the little dog.